Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 97 of the USMB Lead Pods, and happy Valentine's Week. My name is Matt Ersman, and grateful to be your host today. And today we're going to spend some time talking with Gary Hoag. Gary is one of the speakers coming up for a convention in July. He'll be kind of the featured speaker for the Pastors Conference portion of the event. Gary is a really fun and interesting guy. He is the president and CEO of a group called the Global Trust Partners, which you'll learn more about here in our conversation today. And he is also the self-proclaimed generosity monk. And I'll let him explain what that means and how that came to be. And he is also likely one of the only people I've met who is both a New Testament scholar and an accountant. He's really given his life to teaching and providing resources all about church generosity, and we just had a really fun conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know Gary, and it's also just fun to get to know him a little bit before we get ready for a convention coming up in July. So without any further ado, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor for today's episode, and then we'll get to my conversation with the generosity monk, Gary Hoag.
MB Foundation is pleased to be a sponsor for the USMB gathering in July. We are delighted to bring a good friend of ours, Gary Hoag, as the primary resource for the pastor gathering. Gary has consulted with MB Foundation in various areas of governance, biblical stewardship, and fundraising. He will be an excellent resource to the pastors in these areas and so much more. MB Foundation is committed to providing biblical financial stewardship solutions, including planned giving services, loans, investment certificates, fund management, and stewardship education. Bringing Gary Hoag to resource our pastors is an excellent application of this commitment to you. We are available to serve you from our offices in Hillsborough, Kansas and Fresno, California. To learn how financial stewardship solutions can benefit you, visit www.mbfoundation.com or call us today at 1-800-551-1547. MB Foundation is pleased to partner with USMB to bring you this episode of Lead Pods.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to a new friend to the USMB family. Today we're talking to Dr. Gary Hoag. Gary is the president and CEO of Global Trust Partners. He is the self-proclaimed generosity monk, which I'm really excited to hear more about that because that is a great title. We were just chatting before we started here. Gary said this year he's been in 19 countries. He's written 10 books. He's been writing daily on his blog for 14 years. This guy is just a really great expert to have with us. So Gary, thank you for being with us on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm thrilled to be with you, and I look forward to the conference next summer.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that's one of the main reasons we're talking with you today is you're speaking with us next July at the conference, speaking to the pastors, and we're just looking forward to getting to know you better there. So leading up to that, today we just really want to get to know you and hear more of your story, hear more of your background. So when we get to see you in person in July, we already know who you are and who we're dealing with. So Gary, I know you're married, you've got some kids, you live in Denver. Fill us in. What else do you want us to know before we get too far here today?
Sure. Well, and since I'm speaking to the pastor's track, you could also say Reverend Dr. Gary, because I am an ordained minister. On the family side, so my wife is Jenny. We've been married 31 and a half years. And, we're among the group of people who was super thankful. Both our kids got married right before COVID. We saw all those weddings get postponed or whatever because we couldn't have in-person gatherings. So I like to say we went from 2 kids to 4 kids virtually overnight in October of 19 and January of 20. Our son, Samuel David, and our daughter, Sophie Victoria, both got married. And I'm thrilled to share that we're now grandparents. We actually have a 1.5-year-old granddaughter, Eve or Evangeline, which is a great name, means good news, especially for a New Testament scholar. That my first grandchild's name is Good News. And then we're going to have another grandbaby. We don't know whether it's a boy or girl in April. So awesome. I wife, 2 kids, 2 to 4, went from 2 to 4 kids and 1 grandbaby. And we actually have a German short-haired pointer named Grace, which I love walking our pheasant hunting dog every day. And that's a little bit about me living here in Littleton, Colorado, suburb of Denver.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, well, it's great to get to know you. I'm excited to diving in today and obviously to hear you in July. So Gary, you are known really around the world for your work with generosity specifically. So let's just kind of start there. A lot of people listening may not be very familiar with Global Trust Partners. Can you fill us in on what is GTP and I want to be careful. I'm going to accidentally say Chat GPT. It's not GPT, it's GTP, Global Trust Partners. So tell us about what that organization does and what your role is there.
Sure. In America, I'll give the background to GTP because people might not know what Global Trust Partners is. In America, we see a seal on Christian ministries that says ECFA, stands for Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. Quick background on that. Way back in 1979, some famous television evangelists were raising money for this and spending it on themselves. Corruption. It got in the news media that, can pastors be trusted? Are they all stealing money? And so this organization was born by Billy Graham and others called ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. Well, fast forward 30 years into ECFA's existence, it's 2009. They asked me to write my first book, The Sower, Redefining the Ministry of Raising Kingdom Resources, because ECFA wanted its members to do more than grow gifts for their ministries. They wanted to grow givers. And so my first book was on the integration of faith and fundraising. And that I wrote that book, no kidding, Matthew. I wrote that book freely. It spread all over the world. And so that birthed ECFA doing international work. That is ECFA helping build faithful ministries in other countries. And so I've helped set up ECFA type groups through GTP. I've helped set up groups in South Korea, Philippines, Australia, Kenya, Guatemala, Egypt, India, Indonesia, and counting. So in other words, GTP is this international entity endorsed by ECFA in America to multiply faithful stewards, help ministries follow standards for local sustainable ministry. And so it's super rewarding that through my work as president and CEO of GTP, I get to help churches and ministries flourish around the world.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. And again, we spoke a few minutes before we started recording, and I know you are a biblical scholar, especially in the New Testament. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, what led to your focus, your passion specifically on generosity? Did that come as a result of your study, or what led from scholar to kind of being the generosity guy?
Sure. So actually, you don't know this, and not a lot of people know this. Generosity is really something that has been a commitment to the demonstration of our Christian faith in my family for about 4 generations. So let me use this word picture. If I say the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life, hopefully you can envision Jimmy Stewart, and you can envision that he basically, during the Great Depression, lets go of all his wealth to saves the town, And true story, if we go back to my great-grandparents at the turn of the century I grew up in west of Cleveland, Ohio. John and Edna Hoag were generous, and they had a saying. They said, our wealth is like a cup. God fills it so we have something to enjoy and share with others. And so when they hit the Great Depression, their stories, much like It's a Wonderful Life, they gave away their wealth, saved the town, and contributed to the flourishing of many, even to the point where if you fly to Cleveland today and you drive to the suburb of Rocky River, in front of City Hall is a monument to my great-grandparents. And I tell this story this is not about promoting the Hoags. This is about the impact a family can have on generations. Because you see, my great-grandparents would end up giving a bunch of money to build the Sunday school wing on the church. They would end up saving the town in the Great Depression. They would end up doing all these things because they believed their wealth was like a cup. God filled it so they'd have something to enjoy and share. They didn't believe God filled it so we could keep it all for ourselves.
Right.
So what do you think their children did? So their children, and then their children's children, and I'm in the ranks of their children's children's children. And so generosity, I have to tell you, Matt, it goes back to our family seeing for generations that God blesses us to be a blessing. So it's not just like true of Father Abraham. It can be true of every one of us. And when we live it out, we can actually have an impact on our children and children's children.
Yeah, very cool. And I like what you said here just a few minutes ago about just the importance of trust, right? And unfortunately, over the years, a lot of churches have kind of lost some trust because of some kind of headline things that have not been very good for the church. Can you just talk about that a little bit? Like what are some ways that we can make sure that doesn't happen in our churches? Just the importance of trust. How can we be on the right side of that before something bad happens? That's just an important thing I'd love to hear you talk about.
Sure. I'm really glad you asked the question because a lot of people are not even attuned to the fact that trust is literally like the pillars or the foundation that hold it all up. Yeah. So let me comment on that and why I would give my life to establishing trust in settings. So here's what it looks like. And I could use this description of a local church in rural America, or I could use this of a church in the majority world. So what I'm going to say matches, it fits anywhere on the planet.
Okay.
The first element you need in every church or congregation are stewards. You need good and faithful people. And so one of the things GTP does is we provide biblical teaching and trainings to multiply faithful people. Okay, now when you have faithful people, all of a sudden you're going to have money flowing because they're stewarding God's resources generously and wisely. And so the first thing that's needed in every context is stewards. The second thing, and this is where trust comes in, the second thing is standards. In other words, what I demonstrate as a Pauline scholar, wherever I'm teaching or speaking, I demonstrate that the Apostle Paul cared as much about faithful administration as he did about gospel proclamation. Because watch, if you have gospel proclamation, but no faithful administration, the show's going to stop really fast. In other words, everything's going to collapse because people are going to say, this isn't trustworthy. Okay?
Right.
Trustworthy. And so let's go back and say, what does it mean to follow standards? Standards means how we administrate, how we govern, how we do things is going to be seen by all as being, in the words of the Apostle Paul, right before God and man. So let's start with man. That's obeying the laws. And if you don't do that, you go to jail. Okay. Right. So this is the bottom. It's the floor. It's not the ceiling. So a lot of people might say, oh yeah, well, we're not breaking any laws. Well, that's great. Are you following a higher standard? And so in America, ECFA, and by the way, if you're listening and your church and you want to get accredited with ECFA in the United States, contact me because I can wave my little wand and waive your application fee because I'm an ECFA press author. And I want your church to demonstrate compliance with these standards because here's the reason. When one church demonstrates a lack of trustworthiness, the media just eats it alive. They'll put you in the news and they'll say, look, this church mismanaged these funds. So immediately it puts doubt in people's minds and it breaks down the word you just said, which is no trust. Well, and if the younger generation especially says the church is not trustworthy, then the reality is every congregation is one generation away from let's just say closing. Because it's like, well, if the next generation doesn't trust us, so we follow these higher standards. Okay, so stewards, standards, we follow these higher standards of transparency and accountability. Why? Because we want to preserve God's reputation. That's it.
Yep.
And so if ministries have faithful stewards and they follow standards, and you affix that seal, which in America is that ECFA seal on churches and ministries, you affix that seal, what's it give you? It gives you the capital T word, trust. People say, you know what? I trust this ministry. If they say they're raising money for Ukraine, they're not just raising money to put it in their pocket. They're going to send it to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so this gives people confidence to participate in the gospel with what they have. And so it creates what I say is accountability is the pipeline for generosity.
Yeah.
It creates the conduit for people to put to work what they have in advancing the kingdom. Is that helpful, Matt?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I don't know if you plan to talk about this in July, but I guess can you give us a broad level? So what practically does that look like? What do we need to do? Is it do we need to have just kind of open books, or what day to day? What does it look like for a church to earn that kind of trust?
Sure. So in America, ECFA has what they call 7 standards of responsible stewardship. Okay. And it's only 1 page. And you know what? When people look at it, when they look at the list, and you would read it, and this is what people say every time they read it. They say, every church should do this. That's what they say.
Yeah,
they say, in other words, number 1, we're going to have a statement of faith. Well, of course, every church should have one. Number 2, we're going to have an independent board. By the way, you know what happens in many parts of the world? A lot of people say, well, this is my church, and I'm going to hand it down to my son and his son and his son. And when you say, what's the governing board? They're like, basically, it's our relatives.
Yeah.
You're like, that's not an independent board. That's basically a family putting a shingle up and calling it a church.
Right.
And then when you talk about layers of financial transparency, all it means is that our church finances are going to be independently financially reviewed, or if we're a big enough church, independently financially audited to verify that we're handling God's money with integrity. Now you'd say, every church should do this.
Yeah.
And the reality is there are many churches, which are not very big, where they don't have an independent financial review. They don't have, and these are pieces which build, watch this, is it extra work? And the Apostle Paul would say, it is. Paul would say, we take great pains to do this extra work on gift administration because we want it's right before God and man. And so does the government require you to do it? The answer is no. Yeah. So if the government, that's down here, the government would say, just don't steal and don't, do these things. Whereas up here, if we comply with a higher standard, what it does is it gives the people, especially the savvy people in your congregation, it gives the people, because if pastors are listening, there are people in your congregations who are thinking what I'm going to say right now. They're thinking, can the church handle a gift of $100,000? Yeah. Can the church handle a gift of $1 million? And the reality is, if the generous people whom God has blessed in your church don't think you have the capability of stewarding a gift of that size, guess what they're going to do? They're going to work somewhere else in the kingdom because you haven't demonstrated the ability and capacity to steward significant funds. And now you might be sitting here as a pastor praying for resources to add another staff member, praying for resources to expand the programs that will serve the people in your community. But if you're not demonstrating you're faithful with little, the people in your congregation aren't going to give you more. And so this is the angle that I might talk about it with pastors, to say, to get ECFA accredited in America or in another country, to get accredited by the local peer accountability group. And by the way, all peer accountability is brothers and sisters working together to preserve God's honor and reputation. Yeah. So does that make sense, Matt? In other words, this is why this is important for a pastor who has a vision for a community, who wants to mobilize other people to get involved. It just demonstrates with external verification, we're stewarding well the resources God's entrusted to us.
That's good. That's so important. And I'll give one just quick example, just because this has been really practical in my life recently. So I have a daughter who's in kindergarten. She's in public school, right? And it's a great school. I've really nothing bad to say about the school. but she's had it's as we're recording this, it's November, so she's been in school a few months, and they've had 3 or 4 fundraisers already for the school, which is great. But I'm always shocked because I work at a church, I have a church background. There's just a fundraiser, but they don't really explain what it's going to. And there's really I don't know if I give my dollars here, I don't know what are they going to do with it, and why do they need money, and why? And so I guess in a weird way, I'm so used to so much accountability and so much openness with how our church handles money. I'm shocked when I go out in the world and there's just so little of it, right? So I hope that if more and more churches do what you're talking about, instead of the church having this reputation of, we have some bad examples in our history of mishandling money, not us specifically, but the church in general. We should be leading the way in total transparency, total God-honoring finances. So if all the churches listening, if you're not already a part of this group, you should be. And I'd just love it if we could turn the tides and be known for what you actually show people exactly where their money's going to go. What a crazy thought, right?
And let me ask you this. I want to turn the interview around.
Okay.
So your church does communicate well. It exhibits accountability and transparency. What does that do as you think about giving to different opportunities? What does it do within you?
Yeah, it totally gives you confidence. It makes you want to be more generous. You get to see the fruit of what you're contributing to, which is huge.
Right. And notice, I even notice in your tone of voice, the energy builds, the excitement builds. And so when you combine generosity with accountability, I like to say around the world, that's what gives you sustainability.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, do we want to see our churches thriving, sustained by local generosity? The answer is yes. Well, then let's just have good old-fashioned faithfulness. Let's have accountability so that as we're encouraging generosity, we're going to see that sustainable thriving that we want to see. And by the way, the pandemic, it just exploded the reach of GTP, because what it did was God shook the earth and it showed everybody whose house was not in order.
Yeah.
Literally the gaps became glaring. And so that all of a sudden, all across the planet, church and ministry workers were saying, what do I have to do to put my house in order? Because how we're set up right now is not sustainable. In other words, it's not. And they started to realize, wait, what's the pathway to sustainability? It's not stockpiling a bunch of money. It's faithfully using what you have and then communicating how you're faithfully doing that. And so you can see now in this opening to this interview, you can see, wow, no wonder God would guide this guy who dedicated his life to encouraging Christian generosity. No wonder God would put him in a place to use his accounting degree and his other, because I have this weird educational background where I'm probably the only PhD in New Testament that also has an accounting degree. And so God's using these pieces, at least in my life, to put the structure in place that's missing in a lot of places so that local church ministry can flourish, not depending on outside support.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, and you just talked about your background. I think I want to get into the generosity monk. So I know there's kind of a story there of how this title came to be and what your kind of daily rhythm is now. So tell us, how did you become known as the generosity monk?
Sure. And anybody out there, when you hear the word monk, all I just want you to do is smile. And I want you to think, actually, I'll tell the story. So I want to take you back to 2009. And I want you to picture I was 40 years old. So immediately you're doing the math on how old I am. But I was 40 years old and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking and I'm praying because my president left. I'm vice president of Denver Seminary and I'm praying what any young VP would pray. I'm saying, Lord, what does this mean for me? What do you want me to do? And when I prayed the prayer, what do you want me to do? The Lord appropriately humbled me and reminded me, Gary, I'm Lord of the universe. I don't need you to do anything. So I was appropriately humbled. And then I felt like when I changed the question to what do you want me to be? My first thought was, Sarah laughed when God said, I want you to be a mommy. In other words, she thought she'd never have a baby. And so I was like, wow, well, what do you want me to be? And I felt like the Lord said, I want you to be the generosity monk. And I laughed. I was like, oh, that's me. Yeah. And because I knew a lot about the monks and the commitments they made through the centuries. And so I said, wow, what do you want my commitment to be? And it was, I want you to dedicate your life to encouraging Christian generosity. And the monks always had a daily office. And so my daily office would be, Gary, just spend time in my word and in what saints through the centuries said about generosity. And I'm going to teach you things that you can share with others. So God is my witness. It was June of 2009. I was having a quiet day, actually sitting in a mountain, like a peaceful area in the mountains. I had my Bible, my water bottle, and, it was nothing glamorous, my journal. And I went home and I told my wife, she's like, Gary, that's you. You're the generosity monk. My kids, who were like young teenagers, they were like, oh, Dad, that's totally you. And so I said to the kids, though, I said, I feel like I'm supposed to, literally build a basic website. I knew nothing about web development. Back then, my Apple computer had a program called iWeb, actually. And so I built this very simple website that night called Generosity Monk. And the next morning, I posted a daily meditation. And it was what a saint said about generosity. And then I did it the next day and did it the next day. And here we are more than 4,000 days later, 14 years later. And all Generosity Monk is I've dedicated my life to encouraging Christian generosity. I do daily, fresh study every day. And I post whatever God teaches me. And I don't do it for the world that reads it. I do it out of obedience to God because the discipline transforms me. Yeah. But pastors, this is what I get from pastors. This happened yesterday. I got a call yesterday saying, Dr. Gary, we're approaching Thanksgiving. I want to do a study. And this is what was so classic. The pastor said, I want to do something on thankfulness. And I immediately want you to remind me where to find the archive. Because I know you post daily meditations and there's an archive of like 4,000 of them. And the pastor simply said, I want to go look at the ones that have the word Thanksgiving in them. And so I said, generositymonk.com, just click on the meditations page and you can search. And I said, like, if you want to know what did, Menno Simons say, you could type in Menno and then you get all my posts on Menno. Or you could...
You know your audience. Good job. Way to go.
Yeah, there you go. Well, but here's the reality. I've trained pastors in many evangelical denominations, and I've had them say, you know more about our tradition than we do. And I say to them, it's because I've studied the original documents of the founders of your tradition. And so just hear Generosity Monk as this guy's committed in a world where there's not a lot of commitment. This guy's committed. And, I'm vested now. I'm 14 and a half years into this. And so I'm happy. It's transformed me. So I can't not do it daily. But just hear that the person who's coming to serve you is committed to this topic. Yeah. I've studied it through church history. And that journey, Matt, has caused me to realize that church history is essentially just ordinary people committing themselves to a radical, extraordinary gospel message and living it out. And then through them, God's done extraordinary things. Yeah. And the generosity piece is they're just generous at all times, on all occasions, and God does amazing things through them. Not because they're loaded, but because God is. Not because they have, all the resources, but because they've come to realize He does. And so, that's Generosity Monk. So I'm just this ordinary guy who wants to help everyone realize that this topic through church history is one where it's probably our greatest form of evangelism.
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. Well, it's great hearing your story, Gary. And I guess before we run out of time here, maybe we could just end with a couple kind of practical things for, again, our audience as pastors and church leaders, things that we're all thinking about. There's all these headlines about recession and economy is not doing great. From your experience and maybe any research that you've done, I guess, is it true? Is that affecting the church as much as the headlines kind of make it sound? Or what else do you want pastors and church leaders to know in our the economy, the realistic economy that we're in? What should we be doing something differently as we're talking to our congregation in the time that we're in, or just given the reality that we're at, what would you say to church leaders today?
Well, it is true we are living in an inflationary environment. Mm-hmm. It is true that we are living in times where competing ideologies are trying to destroy the family, destroy the church. It's true that we're living in the United States in an increasingly antagonistic context to Christian values. These are true things. Yeah. And so to disregard these realities, it's like I went and walked the dog this morning and it was like 26 degrees. It would be like going out without my coat on. It would be, you would be unprepared to minister and function. So you're not demonstrating empathy if you don't acknowledge to your people, that we are living in stretching times or difficult times, because people whose income doesn't change much year over year, but now all of a sudden the cost of consumer goods has risen dramatically. Yeah. We can't, those are realities. Mm-hmm. What I want pastors to realize is that first and foremost, generous congregations start with generous pastors. It starts with people who actually live according to their values. So despite the fact that things cost more, or despite the fact that there's these realities that are out there, and that our kindergartners have 6 fundraisers by November. Right. And of course you want to support these things because it's your child, they're in activities, whatever. Yeah. Is the start is you as a pastor deciding not how much of God's money or how much of my money do I need to give to God. Mm-hmm. As a pastor, ask the question that Richard Foster articulates so well. We shift the question. We ask, how much of God's money do I need to keep for myself? Yeah. So if your congregation sees you as living simply, giving generously, starting with your local church, which impacts your community, but also having a view of missions, people who are suffering and hurting around the world, people who are battered by war. For example, I've been in Ukraine in the war zone during the war, and I'm headed back again this March. And why do I say that? I say we need to be people who move toward brokenness, not away from it. Because Jesus, when I see Jesus, I see a person full of compassion, moving toward need, not away from it. Yes. So if your church sees this, guess what they're going to do? They're going to move toward brokenness. Yeah. They're going to take their resources with them. So the first message I want to send to pastors is your church will do what you do, not what you say. In other words, they'll follow your example. And I can demonstrate this with research. The second message I think, Matt, I would give is that growing a culture of generosity in a local church, it takes time. Yeah. It takes time because we don't figure it out till we live it out, that when we are generous at all times and all occasions, we don't end up empty, but rather enriched. And so we in the congregation, we don't figure this out like in one day. It takes time. So we live this out, and then we look back on the year and we say, wow, look at what God did this past year. So you need to be this person who helps your church take steps, reflect on those steps. Wow, look at what God did. Yeah. And then reflect together. And so you have not just this short view of how we're going to meet budget, but a long view of how are we going to be the people of God for the community where he's put us. And the last thing is, and this is what we'll do when we're together at the conference, is You need to give your people and help your people develop a theology, with basic points that shapes the practice of their generosity. And so, like I use the simple expression that my grandpa said, our wealth is like a cup. God filled it. We'd have something to enjoy and share. Notice how that would shape the culture of our family. We would see all God's blessings with a purpose to be enjoyed and shared. So developing that culture in a congregation, it requires the bedrock of trust, right? And transparency and communication, and then time, right? Time of practicing it. Because I would guess, let me pivot back to you, Matt. I would guess that your church is not where it was 5 years ago and not where it will be 5 years from now. Can you see growth?
It's complicated during COVID, but yes and no, depending on how you measure growth.
Well, I mean, I'm not looking at quantitative numbers so much as qualitative depth.
Definitely spiritual growth.
I'm thankful we serve a Jesus who didn't say, Matt, go make 100 disciples, because you would go, gosh, I think I can only hit 32, so I give up.
Right.
And he didn't quantify it, he qualified it. He said, go and make disciples and teach them everything I commanded you. Now that's the time piece. It just takes time. And so what's needed is we need people who are out there who are trustworthy, consistent, because the Christian life, in the words of Eugene Peterson, is a long obedience in the same direction.
Oh, man, I like that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, well, Gary, I'm going to try to get you out of here on this last question. I want to keep it as practical as we can, because I think a lot of times when we talk about finances in church, I think it's easy to maybe oversimplify or maybe aim for a goal that's probably not really realistic. So you've done a really good job already of setting the groundwork of, we need our pastors to be trustworthy. We need to be transparent with our finances. What else, if you were to kind of model a model generous church in the real world, what does that look like? And what are some other kind of baby steps we can start to get there? Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet?
Sure. Well, I mean, I got to save something for the conference.
Yeah, sure.
But so how about this? I'll save the details for the conference.
Sure.
But the way I would describe it is, your church needs to understand that generosity is not something we do, it's something we are. Let me explain. So I was working on my PhD in England, and I had to use, this true story, I had to use the NRSV every time the scriptures were mentioned in my dissertation. And so what would I do? For like the years I was kind of writing, the 3 years in there, I used the NRSV just every day in my devotional. I actually have a Greek on one side, NRSV on the other. And I'm reading one day in Galatians. And it's the famous passage. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. And then in most translations, it says goodness, but the NRSV translated generosity. And I was like, wait a minute. I looked over on the Greek side. Here's the Greek word agathosune. And you know what I discovered, Matt? And this is what every church, if churches do this, it unleashes heaven, okay? I realized that the fruit of God's work in Matt, the fruit of God's work in Gary, the fruit of God's work in insert your name, is that we become loving, we become patient, we become generous. And so I did some more study, and I realized all this means is that we realize we are not containers of God's blessings. We're conduits. And so when a church realizes just think of the implications here. When a church realizes we're a conduit, or actually, let me go backwards. If a church thinks of itself as a container, you know what it'll do? It'll just focus on itself. It'll focus on how do we preserve the status quo, and how do we take care of ourselves? And, I think the church is this beautiful entity that exists. The church is this beautiful entity that exists for the sole purpose of serving others, right? And so we are not a container of blessing. Like we studied the word this morning and you learned something. God didn't just teach you that so you could keep it to yourself. You're to share it with others. And so all generosity is if we want our churches to be flourishing, is we got to see ourselves as conduits of blessing to our community.
Yeah.
And everybody sees themselves in that light. Generosity becomes not something we do the third month of the year, and then the rest of the year we're just focused on ourselves. Generosity becomes, wow, that church exists for the purpose of being a blessing to our community. So when that happens, you're going to see some otherworldly, some pretty cool stuff happen. And so I think if your church, and again, I'm saving the rest for the conference, but
that's great.
More details. But if your church sees yourself as not a container, but a conduit of blessing to your community, I think a lot of the other stuff will take care of itself.
Yeah. No, that's well said. That's really well said. Well, Gary, as always, our time went really fast today. We covered a lot of ground. I loved getting to know you. It's been great just hearing more of your story, more of your ministry. We'll obviously look forward to hearing more from you in July. So let's see if I can get this right. Doctor, Reverend, Monk, what other accountant? What other titles am I missing here?
I love my favorite new title is Grandpa, and husband and father are right up there. I love fly fishing and pheasant hunting, but I look forward to meeting everybody, and you can just call me Gary because I'm just happy to be a friend of God and a brother and sister to everyone who's going to come.
Yeah. Well, you've been generous with your time today. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you then, Gary. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Do you or your congregation make it a practice to begin each calendar year with a special focus on prayer? With this practice in mind, the Christian Leader began 2024 with an issue focusing on Jesus' model prayer. The feature department in the print magazine opens with an overview of the Lord's Prayer, followed by 5 essays on each of the verses from Matthew 6, 9 through 13. Read the January-February issue online at www.christianleadermag.com.
Well, once again, many thanks to Gary for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And listening back, Gary's just a very tweetable, quotable, I guess Xable. I don't know what we say these days, but he had a lot of little phrases that just stuck with me. I love the idea of being a conduit of blessing, not a container. And accountability is the pipeline for generosity. And I think he summed up well that as churches, one of our jobs is to preserve God's reputation or give people a positive image of what being a church leader can be as far as it relates to finances. So again, I hope you start to consider now joining us for the convention in Omaha this summer so we can hear more from Gary. You can also check out generositymonk.com. That's where he keeps his blog that he mentioned, and he's also written several books. So if you look him up on Amazon or wherever you get your books, you'll find several options there if you'd like to learn more about Gary and his resources. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up today. So thanks again so much for listening. Glad to have you here. Hope you have a great week ahead. We'll see you next time. And I just have to say it. Go Chiefs.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.